Sports Talk Chicago. Here with Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's a Bulls insider at Stadium, sports reporter at ABC7, and the host of the Gimme The Hot Sauce podcast with Stacey King. Please welcome Mark Schanowski to the program. Mark, it's great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing well, John. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being here. What's your evaluation of this Bulls season, first off?
It's been amazing how they've been able to overcome this series of incredibly serious injuries and still be near the top of the Eastern Conference. I mean, for a lot of teams in this situation, you'd see them start to fall back in the conference standings, but they've been able to find ways to win games. A lot of credit goes to Billy Donovan and his staff for being flexible with their rotations and maximizing whatever talent he has available on a given night. And hopefully they can get these last two wins going into the All-Star break because the schedule really gets tough when they resume the second half of the season.
Did you expect this sort of success from them, injuries or not? I mean, they're in the Eastern Conference. I don't think many people did.
Yeah, I thought that going into the season, they were probably going to be in that battle for the 6 to 8 seeds in the Eastern Conference, but a couple of teams got off to slow starts, especially the Knicks. The Knicks had just totally gone into the tank. The Atlanta Hawks got off to a real slow start. Remember, they made the conference finals a year ago, and the Boston Celtics started very slowly. So that enabled the Bulls to get a jump on the competition. Brooklyn was trying to find their way with, Kyrie not being available at the start of the year and James Harden kind of in and out of the lineup. So they had an opportunity to take advantage of slow starts for a lot of teams. And I think as they built some confidence, that just allowed them to feel like, hey, you know what? Why can't we stay here for the entire season? And of course, DeMar DeRozan is playing at a level that no one could have expected when he came over in that trade with San Antonio. He's been around the league a long time. We know he's an outstanding player, but he's playing at an MVP level. And when you go back to the start of training camp in September, no one could have predicted that.
Was he the steal of the offseason?
I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, he's averaging 27 points a game. He's now got a streak of 5 straight 35 or more points per game. It's just been incredible. I mean, like I mentioned, he was fantastic in Toronto playing with Kyle Lowry. He kind of fell off the map in San Antonio because the Spurs were bad the last couple of years, but it wasn't that he was playing poorly. It just you didn't hear much about him. So, when they got him, I was wondering about the fit with Zach LaVine, but those questions disappeared after the first week or so of the season.
How do you think they played together? Like when you watch them play together on the court?
I think they've been great. Both of them like the mid-range shot. They will play isolation ball at times, but Zach has done a really nice job of saying that DeMar is going to be our primary scoring option in a need situation, and I'll just find a place to spot up where I can either shoot an open three or maybe catch the ball and make a quick drive to the basket. And I think that, both those guys have tremendous respect for each other, and that shows in their play on the court, the comments they make about one another. Now the key for the Bulls is, Zach is going out to LA to get a second opinion on his sore left knee. You have to hope that nothing serious shows up in that exam and that hopefully he can get back after the All-Star break and play at a high level again.
What do you think the problem is with Zach? I mean, I've heard that, there's been knee discomfort for him for a while. He's played through it. Are you very concerned about this?
You have to be concerned because that's the same knee that he had the ACL tear. And, anytime you have surgery like that on a joint, you could have some problems. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know if it's a scar tissue kind of issue or just the fact that, the ligaments just get sore every now and again. So I think Zach will be back. The key for the Bulls right now is not to rush him. I know because they're so short-handed, Zach wants to play through this. He wants to be available because they've got so many other rotation guys already out, and that's to his credit. But you can't get to a situation where it's really crippling him. I mean, in the Minnesota game the other night, you could see that he was wincing. He was in obvious discomfort. You can't play basketball at the NBA level if you're worried about a high pain tolerance kind of thing. I give him a ton of credit for trying to play through it. Hopefully he'll decide if the doctors recommend to skip All-Star weekend and be ready to go for the second half.
Are the Bulls capable of playing well enough without him to get through it?
They've shown they are. They've had guys out throughout the season, as I mentioned, and still found ways to win. They couldn't go long term without Zach. I mean, if the worst fear came and he had some kind of meniscus tear or something and needed surgery, yeah, that'd be horrible for the Bulls because he and DeMar are really 1 and 1A. And if you take one of those guys away, then the opposing defense can load up on the other guy. And I think that's why that partnership has worked so well, because if you decide to double team DeMar, well, then Zach is going to have easy pickings and vice versa. So if you take Zach away from the Bulls for a long-term situation, I think that would really show. But the way they've been able to win or continue to win without Ball, without Caruso, without Patrick Williams, it's been pretty amazing.
How impressive would this season be if, they didn't go too far in the playoffs due to injuries? Like, how do you make or decipher the difference, rather, between all these injuries, but yet they played pretty well?
Normally you would say after a team hadn't been to the playoffs for the last 4 seasons, just getting to the postseason would be good enough. But because they were leading the conference for a span of almost 2 months, you kind of get a little bit greedy and think that maybe this team can make some noise in the playoffs. And if all breaks right, maybe they could be playing for a championship in June. But with all the injuries and the fact they haven't been able to continue to build that chemistry on the court, and other teams have strengthened themselves, I think with the Brooklyn-Philadelphia trade, those 2 teams now are definitely in the conversation as a contender. You got Milwaukee and Miami as well. So you got 4 teams in the East that have more experience than the Bulls, that have been through playoff situations. Now you're hoping that maybe somehow the Bulls could stay in that top 3, because if you drop below that, the first round playoff series is going to be extremely difficult no matter which opponent you draw.
Mark Schanowski here on Sports Talk Chicago. Mark, how surprising has Ayo Dosunmu's presence been?
He's been fantastic. When the Bulls got him in the second round, as the picks were clicking off, I was thinking, Ayo's falling. Maybe the Bulls will get him. But I didn't think they would take him because, a point guard, kind of a combo guard, wasn't exactly what they needed after drafting Kobe White a couple of years ago. So I didn't know that they would actually pull the trigger on Ayo. That was a pick that you would think maybe Gar Pax would have done because he's the hometown kid. He played at the University of Illinois, and the fans will like it. But, AK had no such commitment to have to do something like that, to make a pick to appease the fans, because he's obviously still very much in his honeymoon period, and he's done a great job through this period. So he didn't have to make a pick of a hometown kid just to appease the fans. This was the guy that obviously they had scouted very heavily and thought that he could contribute at the NBA level. Watching Ayo play at Illinois, you knew that he was a guy that could score off the dribble, good defender, fantastic attitude, but you wondered about his 3-point shooting. Was that consistent enough? And was he a good enough ball handler? Well, over these last 16 games that he started, he's been a revelation. His assist to turnover ratio, I just looked at it before we came on, is 7.1 assists to 1.8 turnovers. And that's incredible. I mean, that's at an all-star level that he's running their offense. He's exceeded everyone's expectations. Of course, he was selected as one of 12 rookies to play in the Rising Stars game coming up this Friday during All-Star Weekend. And if he continues to play at this level, he's got an outside chance to make first-team All-Rookie when the postseason awards are announced.
How do you explain the second-round drop for him?
Hard to say. I think it's mostly the fact that, as I mentioned, scouts wondered about his 3-point shot. Could he be consistent from that level? And he's shooting over 40% from there for the season. And I think the other thing was his handles. At U of I, at times, he was a little bit turnover prone. People would attack his dribble and sometimes force him into mistakes. And I think people wondered, could he run an NBA offense? Well, he's answered those questions and more. And now, people around the league, some of the national writers are touting him as the steal of the draft, and a guy who could potentially be not only a contributor for the Bulls, but a guy who could be, an upper level NBA point guard.
Mark, what still concerns you about the Bulls right now?
Lack of size up front. I mean, that's first and foremost. I've talked about it a lot on Stadium when I do my appearances there, and I've tweeted out a lot of the fact that they play teams like Cleveland or Philadelphia or Milwaukee, teams with a lot of size inside. They're going to have trouble matching up. Now, all the reports on Patrick Williams have been very positive. They're hoping to get him back at some point in the middle of March, and he will help. But Patrick Williams is only 6'7". He's got that long wingspan, over 7 feet, and he can certainly help defend power forwards, but he's not a guy you're going to put in the post and say, well, guard Joel Embiid and stop him, or make sure that Giannis doesn't go off tonight. He doesn't have that kind of size or that kind of experience. I was hoping that they might add another 6'10" type of player, who's got good lateral quickness that they could use to defend for the postseason. They did not get that guy in the trade market because I'm sure all the opposing teams were saying, if you want our guy, like say a Jeremy Grant, we want Patrick Williams back, and AK wasn't going to do that. I think they'll get somebody in the buyout market, but I don't think they'll get the caliber of player that you're going to say, well, we'll put him on Giannis or Kevin Durant or Joel Embiid and we'll be fine.
Do you think that was a good move to protect Patrick Williams?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was the very first move of this regime with Arturis and Mark Eversley. The first thing they did was go into that 2020 draft, the fourth overall selection. There were a lot of names, as you recall, being bandied about that they might take. No one even was mentioning Patrick Williams because he didn't start a single game at Florida State. Leonard Hamilton was bringing him off the bench. His statistics were very modest, but as teams put him through workouts and, they did the physical testing, he kind of popped as a guy that had potential to be, an elite level power forward. Now, we haven't seen it yet because he didn't get a chance to be a focal point of the offense during his rookie season. Then he got hurt 5 games into this season. But I think AK and Mark Eversley are looking at their initial evaluations and thinking, he's 20 years old. He's going to come back. Why trade a guy that maybe has all-star potential for a guy who can plug a hole right now? They have to, for any GM, you have to not only be concerned about this season, but 3 to 5 years beyond. And I think they look at Patrick Williams as a guy that's going to be a foundation of this program going forward.
Why has the Bulls' defense gotten much worse this year?
Well, they lost Ball and Caruso, who are their 2 best perimeter defenders. They were ranking in the top 10 in defensive rating before all these guys went out. And as soon as they lost those 2 guys, they lost that physical defense at the point of attack. You're seeing more opposing guards get those straight line drives into the paint, which kind of compromises your whole defense. And, those 2 guys were the head of the snake in terms of being able to stop the initial thrust from opposing guards. You took them out and you see the impact of what's happening. A lot of teams are putting Nikola Vucevic in the high screen and roll. And for all of Vucevic's strengths as an offensive player, he doesn't move his feet that well in terms of being able to slide out on the smaller perimeter players. And a lot of neat possessions, teams are going to that high screen and roll, and they're getting positive results.
Do you think if everybody comes back healthy, the defense will go back to normal?
Yeah, I think it's certainly going to improve. I mean, you get Lonzo and Caruso out there doing what they do, attacking the opposing point guard, playing passing lanes, getting easy baskets in transition. Yeah, I think the defense will automatically improve. But Billy Donovan pointed out in a recent news conference that we can't just expect, the cavalry arrives and everything's going to be fine, because you build habits up over time. And if your defense has been struggling, some of those issues aren't going to disappear. All of a sudden, Vooch isn't going to become an elite pick and roll defender, and they're still going to lack a little bit of size up front. We didn't even mention the Cleveland Cavaliers, who start 3 guys that are close to 7 feet on the front line, including, the former Bull Lowry Markkanen. And they're one of those rare teams that are going to attack you with size. So there's going to be some issues that they're going to have to accomplish, but other teams are going to have problems trying to defend the Bulls' 3-guard front. And when they get Lonzo back, you'll see a lot of closing lineups where they either have Caruso or Io in there with their starting backcourt, and that's going to cause matchup problems for the other team as well.
Where do you see the Bulls going this year, Mark?
I think that they'll finish in the top 6. They'll be a very strong first round team, and it's just a question of matchups. Let's say they finish 5th and they draw Philadelphia in the first round, who finished 4th. Well, then you have to defend Embiid, you have to defend James Harden. They have Tobias Harris. They have Tyrese Maxey, who's really emerged in his second year as a very outstanding young guard. That's a tough team to defend. Or if you draw Miami with Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry and Bam Adebayo, any opponent you're going to get in that first round is going to be tough. That's why I was saying you hope they can finish in the top 3 and maybe take whoever comes out of the play-in situation, or Boston will probably be 6, and like Boston's won 8 games in a row. So there's no easy draw in the Eastern Conference. The East is stronger than the West right now. We haven't said that in a long time.
Are they a finals caliber team if the matchups go their way?
I don't think so at this point, just because of the fact they lack size up front and they don't really have that shutdown defender that can take on one of those elite players like a Giannis or a Durant or an Embiid and at least hold their own. That's going to be a tough matchup when they get into one of those series. And my hope is that at least they can get into the conference semifinals. I think if they can get that far, it'd be a really successful season for the Bulls.
Mark Schanowski is still here on Sport Talk Chicago. Mark, a few more questions before we finish out. First off, your reaction to the Bears' new hirings at GM and head coach was what?
Well, like so many fans and so many people in the media, I was hoping that they would hire a guy that was, had a great resume of offensive background, that worked with quarterbacks and had a lot of success tutoring those guys. I was hoping that maybe they get Brian Daboll, who was the offensive coordinator from the Bills, because he did wonders with Josh Allen. Now, Josh Allen is a physical marvel. He's right there with Patrick Mahomes in terms of his arm strength, his ability to escape the pocket, design running plays, and really be productive. I thought that would have been a good guy to bring in here. Unfortunately, they went not unfortunately, but they chose to go on the defensive side. And I think what their thought was that they wanted a leader. I think after 4 years of Matt Nagy, was a nice guy, but I don't think really commanded the room as well as they would have liked. They wanted to get a guy who could say, I'm running this football team in all phases, and I demand accountability. I don't think that was Matt's strong suit. So they looked at Matt Eberflus, and all the comments on him have been, very strong leader, very demanding, holds players accountable. And he said that he's going to let his offense coordinator run the offense. He'll let his defense coordinator call signals on that end of the ball, and he'll be an overall leader. And I think that's something that, Matt Nagy always wanted to call the plays. That was his background. He's a former Arena League quarterback, and he felt like I have this expertise on offense that I can share. And he was stubborn to a fault in terms of wanting to go with his system regardless of personnel. And that ultimately that was his undoing. I mean, if Matt Nagy would have had his way, I don't know if Justin Fields would have seen the field at all this year. I think they might have held him out the entire season. But now, I think Matt Eberflus will let his offensive coordinator, Luke Getsy, who of course worked with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, he will get a chance to develop a system around Justin Fields. And only time will tell how good Justin Fields ultimately will be. I know a lot of people are down on him. I still think that he has all the requisite tools to be a very, very good NFL quarterback. I think now it's up to the coaching staff to design a system that'll help him be successful.
Yeah, I think this new regime at least sparks some improvement for next year for Fields.
Yeah, I think so, because he's going to be the unquestioned starter. There's not going to be this, Andy Dalton's a placeholder until you're ready. He's going to get all the work during OTAs and the mini camps during the spring. He'll walk into training camp as the number one guy, and he won't have to look over his shoulder as to who's getting the reps at practice. All the focus is going to be on designing a system around him. I mentioned design runs, sprint outs, moving the pocket, all the things that they did for him at Ohio State. I think they're going to do with him in his second season with the Bears, and I think you're going to see a big jump from Justin Fields in year two.
How similar is this situation for the Bears to the Bulls bringing in Karnisovas and Ebersley? Is there any connection that you see?
Well, I think it's basically the fact that this new regime will not have any allegiances to the players that are currently on the roster. I mean, with Arturas and Mark Eversley, they basically turned over the roster in a year and a half. I mean, everybody was gone except for Zach and Kobe, and they cleared everybody else out. You can't do that with a football team, obviously, because there's so many more players. But I think that it's going to be kind of the same thing with the front office with the Bears. They're going to look to make major changes. Unfortunately, they don't have a first-round draft pick this year because they traded that in the Justin Fields deal a year ago. But they're going to try to make some moves around the fringes to acquire more draft picks. I think they'll be smart in free agency with not trying to spend huge dollars on the glamour names, but try to get more depth because they have to solidify that offensive line. The offensive line was just horrible last year. That was one of the reasons why Fields struggled as much as he did. And I think that they'll go out in free agency, maybe not get the top guys out there, but I think you'll get a couple of veterans in here that will really solidify that group, and they'll probably use a couple of draft picks on the O-line as well.
And Mark, before we finish up today, last question, what's the funniest moment you've had on Give Me the Hot Sauce recently?
The funniest moment. Usually it's about Stacey telling stories about his dogs or something happening in his personal life. I mean, he's got these two American bullies that they're both under a year old, and he was telling a story about one of them being like the prison guy who always lifts weights and pushes the other dog around. And Stacey's one of the most genuinely funny people I've ever been around. And when he tells stories about the things that happen in his everyday life, from him, cooking out in the winter and adjusting his grill with a remote control, and then any story he's talking about his life, just ends up with all of us just laughing and going crazy. But we've been very fortunate in that the Bulls have been fantastic in helping us get some really good guests. We've had DeMar and Zach on. We've had Alex Caruso, and just this past week we had Ayo Dosunmu on. And just the fact we've had a chance to get to know those guys a little bit better. When we talked to DeMar, I don't know if you noticed, when he comes onto the court and when he shoots free throws, he kisses both of his wrists. And I asked him about that. And he says he has the name of his mother and his daughter tattooed on his hands. And that's why he does that, for good luck. So, it's nice to get to know these guys just above and beyond, what their scoring averages is and everything else. And all the guys the Bulls players we've had on have been very open in discussing, things about their own personal lives and just beyond what happens on the basketball court. So, we have a whole archive of shows that you can find on YouTube or all the podcast carriers. And we do a visual platform on every podcast we do. So I would encourage all the people who are big fans of Stacey and are big Bulls fans, just go to YouTube, search Gimme The Hot Sauce, and you'll find the entire catalog of our shows. And, we've done some shows in the past with some of Stacey's teammates from the championship era, guys like Scott Williams and Cliff Livingston and Bobby Hansen, and those are all available. So if you want to catch up on Stacey and his whole adventures, I encourage people to check it out.
I'm a subscriber, by the way, so I tune
Well,
in
we
every week.
appreciate that, John.
Mark, thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate the time. Best wishes with everything you're doing, ABC 7 Stadium, and Give Me the Hot Sauce, and looking forward to the next time we chat.
Thank you, John. Continued success to you as well. I know you've reached a number of great thresholds in your subscribers, and we wish you to continue to get bigger and better with all of your projects.